You're listening to The Gould Standard. This is episode 32, Scaling the Heights with Gould's Wall.
Hello, everybody. I'm Brian Levine, and welcome to the Gould Standard, brought to you by the Glenn Gould Foundation. Once again, we're here to bring you conversations with some of the most remarkable people from all across the world of the arts. If film, books, dance, music, opera, poetry, visual art, theater, novels, or design are what put the spring in your step and elevate you to higher places, you have come to the right location, my friends. But first, while you're stopping by under our celebrated neon piano sign, please do take a moment to press like, share, and subscribe. And if you just so happen to be listening on Apple Podcasts, please kindly leave your reviews, pose your questions, and be part of our community of friends and supporters. And to get more simply scintillating sounds, words, and images, we'd love you to pay us a visit at our website, GlennGould.ca. Now, while you're there, you will undoubtedly notice a floating, hovering, glowing, pulsating donate button. That's because we are a registered Canadian charity, and we deeply appreciate your generous gifts and donations. Your support helps us continue our work. Now, today we're bringing you the first in a series of presentations to mark 2022, the year that Glenn Gould would have turned 90. We'll be exploring the enduring, fascinating, provoking, and endlessly inspiring legacy of the artist who was our namesake here at the Gould Standard. Well, what better way to kick off Glenn Gould at 90 than with the world premiere of an exciting, one might even say death-defying new opera in which the figure of Gould hovers, one might say, over the entire drama. The work is Gould's Wall, and it is a production of Toronto's Tapestry Opera. It will be given its world premiere at Toronto's Royal Conservatory of Music this August the 4th through 12th, and we hope that any of you who can get to Toronto will take the opportunity to see it. Now, we're very lucky today to have the creative team behind this daring work with us. First, we have Brian Current, the composer, Liza Balkan, the librettist, Philip Akin, who directs the production, and Michael Hidetoshi Mori, artistic director of Tapestry Opera. Welcome all. I'd like to start with you, Brian. You are the composer, and I'm assuming that the original inspiration for this work began in your fevered mind. What was it about Gould as a figure that you wanted to capture in operatic form? And also, where did the idea of incorporating the wall as a central symbol originate with you?
I'm very fortunate to be on faculty of the Glenn Gould School, which is part of the Royal Conservatory here in Toronto. And students in their 20s come from all around the world to learn at the Glenn Gould School. And so we put together concerts of contemporary music. And so I come into the Royal Conservatory once a week. And every time I pass this magnificent wall in the atrium. So in 2009, they redid the building, but they kept the historic facade of the historic building, but now it's an inner wall on the atrium of the new building. And so every time I would go by there, I would think, oh, wouldn't it be wonderful to have some kind of piece where singers were going up and down the wall and coming out of the windows, and the orchestra was down on the ground with the audience, and the audience was up on balconies, and it was really exciting. And there's a cafe down there too, and for years there's been artists, painters, writers, that hang around there, and we'd all just talk about, how cool that would be to have this piece on the wall. And Liza was working with students at the Glenn Gould School, and we started chatting about what could possibly take place here. And we got excited about different ideas, and we brought in Michael Mori of Tapestry, and we started chatting about different ideas, and we came up with the namesake of the Glenn Gould School, Glenn Gould. What if he was climbing along the wall, or a Glenn Gould-like artist, and the ups and downs of the climb were the ups and downs of his artistic journey. Because all the students that come from around the world, they are trying to do what Glenn Gould managed to do, which is to achieve mastery in his art. And that is no easy feat. And that is what this piece is all about.
Fantastic. Liza, at what stage did you become connected with this work and the idea of the ascent along the wall? How did that imagery strike you as something that had dramatic and literary possibilities for this work?
Brian Kurd and I were having coffee in the atrium, and I think that Brian had been speaking to a few people about some potential ideas for this. And then one day I just started to talk about the wall itself and what emanates from the wall, what emanates from that building, the music, the art, creation, rigor. And that was sort of the germ of Brian and I talking about this piece. And again, it's the Glenn Gould School. And so Glenn's presence is so vibrant in every corner of that building. And as we were talking, it occurred to me that what was of interest, especially interest to me, was, yes, Glenn Gould is a presence. And so there is the character of Glenn in the piece, who is real. You could call him a ghost, but he's 100% present. However, what the piece enters into is an investigation of creation and art and process and practice. And so I introduced the idea of a young, very talented artist, a woman who is there, who wants to achieve, whose icon is Mr. Gould, and who wants to achieve excellence in her art and her practice and her own voice, to find her own voice. And so we started to think about the idea of climbing the wall as an analogy. So the bricks become what? Are the bricks the keys in a piano? Are the bricks just foundation? Are they art? They're history? So it becomes less linear in a way. It's it's a metaphor. The wall is a metaphor. And again, as I've said, what emanates from the building and the wall and behind the wall constantly with practicing. We have a young artist who journeys, climbs the wall, and encounters Glen through it. And it's really about the symbiosis between a young, talented artist and what they can learn, what they want to learn, what they do learn about the icon, and therefore about themselves and their own art through this journey.
Mm-hmm.
And so we worked on it for a number of years in different variations. And Lord knows there's so much written about Mr. Gould that I went down an incredibly delicious rabbit hole as part of the process.
Yes.
And then finding some of the juiciest, most vibrant bits of storytelling for this particular kind of meditation. It's not a linear story. It's more of like a meditation in a way. One of the conceits of the piece was actually using Glenn Gould's words to create much of the text for both the climber and Mr. Gould and the other beings that are encountered through the windows. So his own words are very much an intrinsic part of the piece.
That's actually fascinating. And it was something I wanted to ask you about, because when you confront Glenn Gould, the writer, it's a very different persona than Glenn Gould, the performing musician. He is quixotic in some ways. He makes huge leaps, which he expects you to follow in a way that I sometimes associate with Marshall McLuhan, for example. He has a very quirky sense of humor that kind of weaves into almost everything. But you sense that there is a profound set of ideas at work, sometimes very loosely bound together, and also just a tremendous sense of idealism about the power of art, the elevation that comes through art, the ecstatic qualities, which he describes in some of his writings. That must have been quite an effort to confront that side of Gould, which I think doesn't get as much attention, and also to distill some of those utterances into dramatic form.
Yes, that was challenging. There's so much. And there's a lot on the cutting room computer digital floor. There are works that I collaborated on with Brian that were really interesting, but we only had a finite period of time. I mean, a piece could be hours long, days, weeks, months long about Mr. Gould, but this piece is around an hour. And so it was about figuring out what might tell the best story for this particular meditation and this particular young climber. What does she need to learn? And what is their relationship? So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, if I may say so, this is a concept and a dramaturgical conceit that has Tapestry Opera written all over it. I mean, Tapestry, Michael, your baby is a company that is entirely dedicated to new original operatic productions. It is a boundary-breaking company in almost every sense of the word. And at what point did this project get presented to you, and what was your reaction? I mean, was it the idea of confronting someone like Gould, who is both historical but still has a very vibrant presence in the culture? What were the features that seemed Tapestry-like to you?
I'm so interested for what people would say is a Tapestry-like thing. But for me, for sure, that would mean things that provoke our imagination, that, we talk a lot about contemporary music, and most people who are classical music lovers think that contemporary music is beep boop sort of combination of atonal and intervallic and not necessarily emotionally satisfying music. But what I like about the word contemporary is it has the width and the times. So something that's with the times in it. And so we strive to do that. And this felt like it was something that was, it's still in our collective memory, as you were suggesting, but also the idea that our generation loves to experience things, not only to listen to them as the generation that grew up with the radio and the gramophone, but that we want our theatrical experiences to push us and expose us to more things in many ways. So the elements of combining a Canadian, maybe arguably the most famous Canadian classical musician, with a site-specific wall, it just was a super tasty proposition. And when it came, I think we were at the point where we were just talking about what could the story do, and Liza and Brian had some ideas, but we were still talking about how do we put a story on a wall. And I thought, I don't think anybody else would do this. But this sounds perfect. I mean, if we're going to convince a new generation of Canadians to love classical music and art music, then it should be around things that are extraordinary.
Well, that gets us to the point at which a production needs to be brought into existence. And this is Philip's bailiwick. And Philip, when you were presented with the rather audacious concept that you would be directing not in linear space, but in vertical space, and not just vertical space of, people walking up stage or going upstairs, but actually climbing a wall as they sing and perform and, express very complex dramatic concepts. Were you a little intimidated by the idea, or did you find this kind of a trip you wanted to take?
You do know that my strength is in naturalism, right? So yes, this was not naturalistic. So it's both it's a challenge in all of its many manifestations of that word. I think that personally, I have a belief in what was been called continuous improvement, which for me says, how do I keep growing as an artist regardless of age? How can I try new things? How can I bring what I've learned forward into new modalities? And so this is part of that. And it's a complicated thing. I mean, I've done a couple of musicals before, but musicals aren't opera. Opera isn't musicals. Then the straight technical issues of the wall and the space are all things to be dealt with, right? So it's a learning experience. It's a growth experience. In many ways, I kind of feel a little bit like our climber in the show, the one who is striving to gain more craft. And I feel like I'm the same way.
Don't look down.
Don't look down, exactly right, because you're working without a net. But I think I was going to say the concept of continual improvement seems to be central to the whole concept of the production. And I'm trying to visualize moving through these vertical spaces. It's very liberating. And obviously, you can look at certain analogs in theater, like Peter Pan and so on. But this is obviously dealing with some rather more, I would say, in-depth concepts, especially when it comes to the struggle and the mission of the artist to reach the summit. I suppose it would be something we'd need a spoiler alert to find out whether the summit is ultimately reached. But I guess that's something that people are going to have to come and see the show to experience. In terms of the non-representational aspects of this production, I mean, clearly a lot of what is being presented is metaphorical. The idea of the wall is a metaphor for, the struggle to reach the peak. Did you find that kind of representation a challenge from a purely dramatic point of view, something to really express in the sort of the inner spiritual struggle being turned into a physical ascent?
I kind of go from the point of view that people, like what makes us human, what makes us a person. And sometimes I feel like in a lot of productions or a lot of shows, things are overlayered. It's a little bit like trying to run a marathon wearing, 3 winter coats. It makes no sense to me. But I think that if we go to who are these people, how can I develop personal relationships with these people? How can they relate as human beings? And by doing that, and then the visuals and the work and the effort for someone to be climbing the wall kind of does a lot of the meta stuff without us having to be all meta all the time. I believe in human beings striving and then letting the audience regard that, engage with that, figure out how they feel about it, and then move on.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe in leaving a space for the audience to fill in. It's not just circus acts, right? This is a tough wall. Let's be realistic here. This is a tough wall to climb. Without a harness and stuff, nobody climbing this wall. It's
right.
hard and it's tricky. You got a soprano singing in a harness in the air. You don't have to be more meta than that.
Right.
All you have to do is have it being a real human being,
right,
singing and talking to a real human being. And all of that other stuff will get laid on.
And that actually raises an issue that I've discussed in some previous podcasts, which is we all love the daring big concept production, but if you don't have the ability to find the human core, which is what the drama ultimately consists of, then the ability after the effect, the special visual element, it becomes sort of internalized once we get used to it. If there isn't a real drama going on, then the visual overwhelms the whole purpose. So I'm really glad to hear that you say that, finding the real people and showing what they're experiencing emotionally is what makes this live as a drama within the context of, this very big meta concept.
I think that's such an interesting question for contemporary opera generally, is like, in some ways, opera invented spectacle and the original theater machines and everything. But at the same time, it's not its greatest form unless the storytelling is really compelling, unless it grabs us by the heart, unless we see people. That's where sometimes Cirque du Soleil is impressive the first time, but it doesn't hold on to you in the same way that a human story does.
Exactly. And also, if I can say, and this gets us back to Liza, it's where the issues about the dramatic quality of librettos becomes really crucial, because I can tell you that in my journey into opera, 19th century opera, what often made the biggest difference to me was the quality of the libretto. If the libretto was dramatically absurd, written in a language that seemed extremely stilted and unnatural, I always had an enormous difficulty, no matter how glorious the music was, or for that matter, how inspiring the production was. I just couldn't get beyond the words. So now you are bringing a kind of a dramatic essence into much of the language of Glenn Gould himself. Did you feel a kind of a thematically linked arc in terms of the pieces that you chose from his writings? How did you draw them together?
Well, again, there was so much to choose from. And I was interested in thinking about this young woman and what, again, as I said earlier, what does she need to learn? And so there's a section that's around fame. And she encounters a celebrity and at a party and these sycophantic guests as a way in which for her to learn about, is she striving for fame? Is she striving for art, creation? Like to grapple with those questions. What is it to come in contact with as a prodigy when you come in contact with the mother or the father figure? What happens when you hear an icon berate the audience? As, Gould was pretty infamous for talking about banning applause and eventually extricated himself from performing live and went into recording, right? So it was around finding the most interesting, hopefully, because there's so many, but some of the interesting journeys for this young artist, for her to eventually maybe find her own voice, to take all that information, learn what she can, and maybe go, oh, I think I'm ready to do this. And the one thing I wanted to offer, as you were talking about the wall and the struggle, one of the things that amazes me about the wall and then made me fall in love with Mr. Gould, like it's impossible not to when you start diving into this human being, this extraordinary human being, was the way in which he reveled and played in the sandbox of precision and trying new things and figuring out a puzzle that's impossible. And so the wall is not just struggle, it is joy, it's figuring something out, it's freedom, it's bashing your head against it, it's working through it, it's finding new heights, it's recognizing, failure's a piece of it. So the idea of it just being a wall, as in struggle, is something that is interesting, because if you think about Mr. Gould's various walls and joys and struggles and precision and climbs, there are so many. And so all that is to say that the wall is like this incredible practice and foundation, not just struggle.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it's a very internal journey, obviously. It's challenging oneself. It is rising to some inner goals that are very hard to define in the usual terms that we measure success by. It's not about income or net worth or promotion, or it's really a spiritual journey. And I think that's very powerfully present in a lot of Gould's own writing. But that also raises the question of how you translate these concepts into purely musical terms. So I think we better have a word again with our composer, and I want to actually dig a little bit into the idiom that he developed for this project. So Brian, you've got a central figure, Gould, who is very strongly associated in the public mind with one composer, particularly Bach. Your style is not Bach's. You're a contemporary composer. Gould also, though, was deeply, deeply engaged with 20th century music which was not popular during the time he came along, whether it's Schoenberg, Krennek, everything but Stravinsky, who he did not like.
Right.
And so how did you set about trying to find a musical language or evolve within your own musical language, a way of bringing this persona and some of these concepts into reality?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, we made the decision very early on not to go down the road of quoting Bach or in the piece or putting, audio files of Glenn Gould playing Bach or anything like that. But there's definitely lots of piano in this. In fact, that there's 5 pianos in the orchestra. So
That's a lot of pianos.
that's a lot of pianos, yes. But it is a Royal Conservatory, so we have pianos. So there's 3 actually on the scene, in the scene, so that, characters can kind of walk on top of. And we have 3 young players who are part of something called the Taylor Academy at the Royal Conservatory. And these are very young players, just in their early teens, as a matter of fact. So, and they are really prodigious. They're going around playing concertos and things. So you actually see during the piece these young Glenn Goulds. Really, one day they could easily be. Well, not easily, but a lot of work. But that you're seeing those. There's also a piano in the orchestra, and then there's a piano that is far, far in the distance too, that plays every once in a while. So the sound world is infused with a piano-ness. So that is the way that we're invoking Gould's sound, I think, rather than trying to have him play, or the idea of him playing Bach. There's also the idea, there's lots of scales, right? Because when you walk through the Royal Conservatory, everyone's trying to master their craft. And the way you do that is by doing hours of scales. So it's kind of bleeding out of the walls. So you hear this effort and this musicality coming through the walls, and this comes out of the piece. Sometimes there's music that has this Sisyphus quality where it goes up, 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 and fall, and up, 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 and fall, and up, 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 fall. And then that goes on throughout. So the idea that what I often say is that composers are trying to say what it feels like to be alive at this time and place in history. And that is why contemporary music often sounds different than what we think of classical music, because we walk around thinking classical music is what, Vienna in 1800 or Paris in 1900. Well, this piece was written in Toronto in 2020, during a pandemic. So that's going to be a very different time and place. So the music's going to sound different. But it's not scary music. It balances between things that really pull on your heartstrings, but also things that play with the ideas that Glenn Gould really loved in some of the non-tonal music too. So it is the type of thing that sometimes you can walk away singing it, but sometimes you have to listen a couple times, and that's okay. I think that finding a balance between all those things does say what it feels like to be alive at this time and place in history.
In addition to the 5 pianos, your scoring consists of, it's a small ensembles or a small ensemble.
Chamber orchestra, yeah. So actually large for contemporary chamber opera, but small for grand operas. So it's quite a sizable ensemble of 14, 15 players, plus the 5 pianos too. So it's really a big team effort. And if you think about all the other people involved in this, it takes an army of people, including the orchestra, to make this happen. And we all know that our goal is really our goal as artists, really, I think, is to inspire people. And that's really what Glenn Gould did. And we're trying to bring that to inspire a city at a time when we could all use a little inspiration right now. And we are going to try and do this by showing examples of living with courage and beauty in our daily lives. And I think I hope that will be inspiring to people.
I love that concept, living with courage and beauty. And I think that is a great way of describing Gould and his life quest, which was definitely the road not taken for most artists, but continues for that reason to inspire people around the world. And believe me, we hear from them all the time from all over the world. Michael, I want to, obviously we could talk a little bit about insurance issues and, some of the rigging issues to get players and singers up in the air, and, what kinds of anxieties they're dealing with. But I think that people can imagine those. And obviously, I'm sure safety comes first in a conception like this. But really, I'd like to sort of zoom out a little bit and talk about the kind of new vistas in opera that Tapestry is dedicated to, and that is its mission. Because one of the things that I've been very impressed by is Tapestry doesn't seek to replace traditional opera. In fact, you work very collaboratively with our mainstream opera companies in this city, the Canadian Opera Company, and I understand now Opera Philadelphia is going to be a partner with you. But the ability to do things in a nimble and also slightly more small scale way, it seems to me opens up a lot of possibilities that would be very difficult for a big traditional opera company to do. Where do you see your role as a company fitting into this emerging world, and what kinds of freedoms and limitations do you encounter in bringing productions into existence?
I can say that one of the exciting things about the logistics of getting a soprano up on the wall was that we got to work with the original architects of the space, I should say the ones who built Kerner Hall and connected it to the old conservatory, for those who know the building in Toronto. So that's been pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, this is a question that I stay up awake at night about, which is, what kind of opera do we deserve is a question. And I'm not a huge fan of the word small. I'll tell you that because where opera started was in a place where it was essentially about bringing these art forms together and about being immediate because it was so close to people. So you look at bringing the great musicians and the great players and the great scenic artist or artist of the day to create something that was totally unique. I think that's the kind of spirit that we want to find in anything that we do. And I'm really inspired by this city because Toronto is always number one or number two as the most diverse cities in the world. And I think that has had such a great impact on our food scene. That's had a great impact on all different on our humanity. I think collectively we start to see each other as people as opposed to as the lines between what separates us. And I think that is actually where I see the most potential for opera from Tapestry's point of view, or the kind of opera that we would want to support is how can we create something that both benefits from this incredible multicultural world that we're in here, where we do share common language and common spaces, and also create an art theater, an art music theater, or opera, whatever you want to call it, that our generation would attend and look at as their own. In the same way that when Bach was writing, it was immediate and compelling for the people who were hearing his works in church every Sunday, that he was composing newly for every Sunday. There's a context that made that music belong to them. And then there's a genius that made it universal and immortal. And I think that the truth in tapping into who we are in this city and at this moment in time is the thing that will make great works now. It's not about trying to replicate what opera did because the world has changed so much. And so maybe this is why we end up doing so many different crazy things, an opera at the Brickworks. Sometimes we're in black box spaces. We did a Jacqueline Dupre sort of biopic opera that was with Matt Heimowitz on cello and Marnie Breckenridge as a soprano. And it was just those two telling her story. Each scenario can be different, but because I don't think that there's a formula now, rather, there's a way of thinking that is we have to be bold in engaging our generation with our greatest artists and not sequester them in universities and conservatories, but rather bring bold ideas to the public so we can capture their imagination. I have no problem with great TV and film, but it is one kind of theater. And I think there's something that music and opera offers that those things don't. And so that's kind of where I love this idea when Brian brought it to me. I mean, it's a little bit bonkers, but we found a way to do it. And I should say, for those of you listening, because this isn't a bonkers, really beautiful space, there are only so many seats because it's not in an auditorium. And we've already started to sell a lot of them. If you are around, please get yourself on the list because it's not unlikely that this will sell out. Not because there's thousands of seats per night, but because there's hundreds of seats per night.
First of all, amen to everything that you said. It's so important for an art form to continue to evolve and to become a meaningful expression of the times. Opera was, many people think that it was always an elite entertainment for wealthy people, and they miss the fact that in the 19th century it was revolutionary entertainment in Italy during Verdi's time that had to be suppressed in many cases because it was so politically radical. We need to sort of clear our minds of the idea that opera is one thing or another thing. It's a form of drama with music. That basically says it all, but it means that it has limitless possibilities in terms of the themes it can tackle, the style that it can present in, the way it can be dramaturgically realized. And I did not mean to be diminutive in using the word small, because some of the most fantastic works in the history of opera or classical music theater, like, for example, Stravinsky's L'Histoire du Soldat, which is not exactly an opera, but has operatic elements, is for a small ensemble, going right back to the beginning with Monteverdi and Il Combattimento di Tancredi e Clorinda, small ensemble, 2 singers and a narrator. Really, the scope and power of the work is not defined by the size of the performing forces, but the ambition and the dramatic goals really set those limits.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to fight back. I was honestly just being a bit playful.
Yeah, for sure.
But the thing I like is when you're that intimate, sometimes like the smaller things actually have a bigger impact. It's like nobody falls in love with a rock band at like a stadium concert. Everybody falls in love with a rock band in a dive bar, in a smaller venue. And it's after you become sort of a loyal super fan that it's okay that it goes to the stadium. And I think we need to remember that that's the evangelical power of music, is when it's personal, when this is directly for you, when you can see the whites of people's eyes, that's when it's exciting.
Absolutely. And if I have one musical pet peeve, it's the concept that the emotional intensity of a musical statement is related to the number of decibels, which of course tends to be in the stadium or the 150-piece orchestra conception of opera or concerts. Whereas for me, the most powerful musical expressions are often those that are a whisper, because they are the most intimate and they do speak with the greatest honesty. And I am sure that in the productions that you've created, like, for example, looking at Jacqueline Dupre, those moments are very, very present.
I hope so. I think so. I think that's right. That's when we hold our breath. There's a moment. I mean, opera can do this too, where we're swept away in the same way that rock and roll does. Like the wall of sound is great and important. And you talking about Verdi, and you think about the chorus from Nabucco. You just want to take part, and that's part of the feeling. But
right.
It's those moments of quiet, for sure, that make us human.
The Glenn Gould figure says there is knowledge in silence, and then all of a sudden the orchestra just stops and there's this resonance and we just listen to the building for 2 or 3 seconds. And so hopefully that's channeling Glenn Gould's knowledge of what you're talking about. Here, let's bring Philip back in.
You just brought me back in about when I was about to say, I've got to go to rehearsal because talking about this is great. Directing them is even better.
I did want to ask you about what the experience has been like working with these singing actors and whether you've had to help them confront some fear of flying, so to speak, being up in the air and still kind of staying in character and getting the emotions across despite the fact that there's really nothing beneath their feet.
This is a very dramatic form of what every actor goes through every time. There's always the risk. There's always fear. I mean, this one, happens to have a height component, but it's the same process, right? It's how do you incrementally build the foundation by which you let artists fly? And that's the same process. Now we've got technological issues and the rigor and, all of that. But you build it the same way, right? You get experience with the wall, you plot a path, you rehearse the path, they climb the path in the same way so that they're in the right position to do what they need to do. It used to be when I started out as a director, I'd get overwhelmed and then I realized you could just say, oh, details. That's just a detail. And we'll figure it out. And that's what we do.
Well, I have to say that I'm really looking forward to experiencing this. I think seeing it or hearing it is not the right word, experiencing it. And great concepts stand or fall by the way they are realized dramaturgically. So, Philip, I am looking forward to seeing how you have managed to cut to the heart of the human drama in these characters' ascent up the wall.
Wow. Nothing like putting it all on me here. I mean, is that fair? I don't think so.
The advantage is you get to take a disproportionate piece of the credit when everyone yells bravo.
Wow. On that note, I'm off to rehearsal.
Okay, thank you, Philip. And everyone, I hope you'll all get out to see Gould's Wall. It sounds like a really incredible, mind-blowing, and revelatory production. It's such a fitting tribute to Gould and his art and the fascination that he still continues to hold in contemporary culture. And I just want to thank you all for bringing this first piece of Glenn Gould at 90 into being. It hopefully will have a long life. And after this initial production, as site-specific as its original inspiration, I hope it will travel far and wide.
As do we.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Liza.
You came out humming 3 days old, and you were waving your arms like a conductor.
Well, friends, that brings to a close our conversation with Brian Current, Liza Balkan, Philip Akin, and Michael Hidetoshi Mori, the creative team behind the new contemporary opera Gould's Wall, getting its world premiere on August 4th and running through August 12th at Toronto's Royal Conservatory of Music, a production of Tapestry Opera. And I hope all of you will join us to witness this exciting event. It is bound to be a spectacle and a spectacular production. And I have to say, Rudrapriya, that the idea of turning the horizontal surface of the normal theater stage into a vertical plane strikes me as being just the kind of unusual, extraordinary, and innovative move that Glenn Gould would probably have loved, although he probably would have kept his feet planted firmly on the ground.
Brian, I'm sure that he would have enjoyed watching it at the very least.
Yes, but from a safe distance. Now, I understand that you have some important messages for our friends and listeners.
Right. Well, the Glenn Gould Foundation is a registered Canadian charity, and we rely on the support of arts lovers like you to continue bringing inspiring stories to life. Please consider giving by visiting our website, glenngould.ca. And if you're interested in keeping up with the Gould Standard podcast and more work from the Foundation, be sure to follow us across social media on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at the Glenn Gould Foundation.
And I hope you'll join us again for the next in our celebrations of Glenn Gould at 90. We have some really exciting surprises ahead for you. And in the meantime, all of your ears, your attentive listening, and your financial support are greatly appreciated. We'll see you again next time.
Other children cried. You Don't slouch. Sit up straight. It's appalling. I sang to you before you were born. You came out humming, and your fingers never stopped moving, and your arms were swinging up and down, and side to side. climbing, be careful of running, be careful of germs, be careful of shaking hands, of touching filth, of catching cold, of climbing, be careful of falling down, of falling ill, be careful of swimming, be careful of running, be careful of germs.